Hey guys, and welcome back to another With You With Me podcast, Finding Fierce. Really excited today. I've got two great hosts. Going to be talking about some really cool stuff about athlete injuries and being resilient. With me today, I've got Richard Harry.
How are you?
Good. And Dee Anderson. Both got really great backgrounds. Rich, ex-rugby union player for Australian Wallabies. 5 years in the Wallabies?
Yep, 5 years.
37 caps.
Short and sharp, exactly. Short and sharp.
Perfect. And Dee, nationally, internationally, work with elite athletes. Got an extensive background, some amazing awards behind you. I'm happy to have a chat today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jazz.
Cool. All right, Rich, we'll start with you. So rugby union, you're an athlete. Did you play your whole life? Is that something you wanted to do as a full-time career?
Yeah, it was funny when I started playing rugby, it was still amateur. So it was, Tuesday, Thursday night, Saturday afternoon, and you had to go and get a job, and it was just a bit of fun. And then in 1995, it went full from 0% to 100% professional. So it went literally overnight as a career choice. And of course, I think I was getting a little bit more playing rugby union than I was at my day job, so I jumped across to that. So and I was very lucky, and then had 5 years as a professional athlete.
I remember you telling me in that situation when you got the contract, you sort of went to your boss and you were like, hey, I've got this amazing opportunity. Are you okay with me, keeping this job here, but I've also want to pursue this football career? How did that sort of go down, that conversation?
Terrible. He just thought, no, you're either full-time or you're not.
Yeah.
And it was funny. And again, because rugby, it was just almost weird that we were getting paid for something that we were doing for free for all those years. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it made sense as a plan B to say, hey, exactly that. Can I work for free? Come in when I can, just to keep my toe in the water. So if it does all go pear-shaped next year or the year after, whatever, that I've got something to go back to. And as I said, he just thought, no. But as I said, I think I was getting about 6 times what I was earning with him. So it was about a millisecond of discussion. And I'll take the footy, mate. Thanks very much.
And what was in your mind there? Were you like, oh, what if this football career thing doesn't work out? Or were you like, who cares? I'll figure that out when it comes around.
Well, I think just and again, I didn't give it a huge amount of thought, but I think I must have thought that because that's exactly what I was thinking. If the whole thing falls over, and I was thinking more financially, like it was like, World Series cricket and just went pear-shaped, commercially, that I would have something to fall back on.
Yep.
And so I was married at that time, I just married. So it was literally thinking about a plan B. And for me, look, so probably that's the way I'm made up, thanks to my parents. That I thought, I think it's very important to pursue something you love. But again, if that doesn't fall over, can we have a plan B?
Yep.
And I think for me, that was it.
Yeah, and Dee, you must come across a lot of athletes in that situation where there might not be enough financials in their sport that they're playing, but they want to pursue this career because, what an opportunity, right? You only can do that for a certain time in your life. So is that something you come across commonly wwithin athletes?
Oh, all the time. And it's the difference between a passion, something that you really, really, really love, and the essentials of living your life. You need money. You need to survive on a day-to-day basis. But I think the transition for most professional athletes has been a tough one because it did happen so quickly in some of the professional codes, and it really affected those that came after them rather than those that were actually involved in it at the time, because all of a sudden that identity of who you were and how you're going to respond to playing in your sport was so wrapped up in one thing. And if you don't have a plan B and you don't have a way of building some sort of identity outside of your sport, it's a pretty rocky road once injury or poor performance or you're deselected kicks in, and it changes everything.
Exactly. And when control is taken away from you for all those sorts of things. I mean, when you choose to retire, that's good. That's again, you're managing the narrative and managing the exit on your terms. But if something happens, you said, you fall out of favour with a coach, get injured, career finishes tomorrow, and if you've got no idea what you're going to do, I think it's pretty bloody scary. And again, I was lucky enough to fast forward to the end of my career. And and again, I had different stakeholders. I was married, kids at that point in time, so I had to know what I was doing. It was like, oh shit, if it fails tomorrow, I'll find something else. I couldn't have thought like that. And again, that's just my DNA makeup. But again, for me, it was a matter of just common sense that if that fell over, I can go to that. And when I retired, making sure that I'm mapping it out. So it's and again, as you said, you so defined living in a bubble playing professional sport. For me, it was really important to make that step out, even more so, because you're going into something to a tangent. It's not like you're leaving one job and going into the next door company. You're jumping out, unless you want to go into coaching or media or something that is specifically linked to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. For me, it was a huge jump. So I had a week in between playing my last test for Australia and South Africa. We took home the Tri Nations for the first time. 6 days later, I'm in a suit, bloody big gorilla at a desk, going, what the hell am I doing? But it was good. And as I said, for me, it was managing that changeover, which was bloody important.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that. We had a really great conversation about you did plan and you did have a plan B and you did sort of prepare yourself whilst you were still playing so that you didn't get stuck when you transition. But
Yeah,
I think the
exactly.
barrier at the moment for a lot of athletes is they're not thinking about that. They're so focused on their career, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is okay to, put your focus into potentially doing some study whilst you're playing or, start networking a little bit so there is jobs lined up when you transition. And an injury is a big thing, right? Like that could keep you out for a year. If you're not contracted in a sport, you're going to need to find a job.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you don't have really good people around you, like clearly you had good people around you that
exactly.
educated you about having that more solid base than just your sport. But if you're an 18-year-old professional football player in most codes and someone hands you over $200,000 or $300,000 and you don't have good people around you to help ground what that means and how to plan for it, your life becomes, very enclosed in your sport very, very quickly. And pretty much you foreclose on a lot of development and a lot of things that you're going to need to survive when sport no longer is around you. So that's why it gets really tough for many athletes when they, we use the word retirement, but if you're a 21-year-old or an 18-year-old gymnast who's been a world champion and you use the word retirement, when you try and get athletes to understand that this is important, they'll just switch off. So it's about how you build your brand, how you really create the best possible environment so your performance works well. And it's almost educating these young people that if you can have opportunities to switch off and not just go and play, computer games as your only other outlet, then you're going to be able to sustain your involvement in sport a lot longer.
And that's the critical point. Everyone needs downtime away from their sport. Like it's too intense, training and playing and all those sorts of things. You need to get your head out somewhere else. And again, also depends on your age too. I think, as you said, you're right. You've got to be sensible about when you do it. So an 18-year-old, typically will have obviously, hopefully a long career in front of them, but they might not. So proportionally, they can spend less time doing this stuff and a bit of Xbox. But when you're 30, 32, I'd be doing a heap more, work-orientated things. And again, that's just being sensible on a proportional basis. But I think for me, what I loved about it in those last couple of years in the Wallabies was the intensity of the sport. Was to get away from that, it was actually doing a bit of work experience, just finding out about what I want to do, catching up with different people, starting to network, and it was a nice way to get out of that whole sporting bubble where it was just it's at times oppressive because you can't bloody get away from it. It's 24/7. Even when you're not on the field, what am I eating? What am I drinking? How am I resting? What am I doing to recover? Blah blah blah. So for me, it was a really good outlet to your point there, which is a bloody good one.
Yeah, just on that as well, going back to networking, studying, looking in that, a lot of sports actually have their own player association, right? So these athletes that are young and on these contracts, ask the question, hey, do you guys offer anything where I can actually do some study, prepare myself? What do you guys have? Because I think a lot of people might not be aware that their association actually offers these sort of services. You're a mentor, right? So if someone was to come forward to you as an athlete and say, hey, I really want to work in X, how do I do it? Like, what would your feedback sort of be? What would you tell them to do?
Well, first of all, sit down and what do they like? What are they interested in? That's the first place to start. And I think if they don't know, then we can go through an exercise where we can close some doors. But I think it's about finding something they want to pursue, what's interesting them, and then starting to see what avenues are, whether there's some study, whether there's, can they go and work loosely with or have an association with a business where if they're travelling overseas, for example, when they're back, they might do 1 day, 1 week, 3 days, another week, 0 days for a couple of weeks. So they can start to build that association, start to get an idea of what they want to do. Because a lot of people here, people I meet and talk, what do you want to do? Oh, I've got no idea. Well, what don't you want to do? I think we had a chat about this. I mean, it's a really good exercise to say, well, okay, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. Da, da, da. So you can start to narrow it down. Again, just put a little bit of structure around what you can do. What are the potential opportunities for you? And again, people don't know what they don't know. Like if you can get out there, and I might want to be bloody a lawyer, and I do that for half a day and hate it, so I can't cross that off the list. And so they can start to educate themselves on what opportunities and stuff they can pursue out there. So as I said, that for me is the most important thing, is that ongoing dynamic process of sourcing alternative opportunities.
And Dee, obviously you've done a lot of work with athlete transition. Is that sort of the strategies you would use, or what sort of feedback would you? Yeah,
I guess before I answer the question, I think it's if you think about a very, very young athlete and someone identifies them with a heap of potential. Yeah. Again, if you don't have people around you that help you to not just think about that word potential and not take on board that identity. Yeah. Like some of these young people are never referred to by their name. They're referred to as the football player or as the soccer player or as the AFL player or whereas the rugby league player or the rugby union player. And so what happens is they shut down, as you're alluding to, really getting to know themselves at a young age. So by the time they reach their mid-20s, or they're starting to sense that, there is a big wide world out there and I don't know who I am, two options happen. They either shut down everything and just continue to play their game and ignore all these signs and signals, or they start to think about and allowing little things to creep in and to explore what their options might be.
Mm-hmm.
And there is such a massive grief process for anyone, whether it's voluntarily or involuntary leaving their sport. That grief process is pretty similar to everyone, but the length of time that it goes on is often dependent upon how well you've been able to find that sense of who you are.
So not letting your sport define you as a person, like understand other parts about yourself. So, when you do lose that, or it's time to retire and move on, you're not like, who am I?
Exactly. But also while you're playing, you have to draw on so many skills to sustain that commitment. And if you're just learning them in a very small pocket of your life, then you're going to run out of, it's a bit like playing a game of golf with just a driver in there. You watch a lot of professional athletes and you see how they respond to situations. It's because their golf bag's only got one or two clubs in it. But the real intentional purpose of the Players Associations particularly is to try and get as many clubs in the bag as possible so that they can respond to all the challenges that they're going to be faced with, just like every other person that lives in the community. It's as you mentioned earlier, the bubble that gets created is not real. It is not real. We think it's real, but it's not. And so it's about how you put as many clubs in there. And that's why you see some people using a driver in a situation where they should be using a putter or using a putter when they should be using a driver, because they've just narrowly developed one sense of focus of who they are.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's some really good advice to think about for athletes. I think they should take that on board for sure. All right, I wanted to get into injuries now. So we've both had our fair share through our career. I'm sure, Dee, back in your sporting days, you had your fair share. And it's really tough. It's a really tough thing, especially when you have your goals mapped out for the year and what you expect as an athlete to achieve. And when that's taken away through an injury, it's really tough. So, Rich, let's talk about you. You had a big goal. You wanted to go to your first World Cup. You had a big ankle injury and you weren't sure of the timeframes. And talk us through that injury. Yeah,
it was pretty interesting. So 99, at the end of the domestic series here, so for the New South Wales, Queensland, blah, 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 ended up not being picked in the squad. So we were playing a game against Ireland and I ended up almost basically doing everything but actually breaking the ankle. So I did all the soft tissue damage and was on crutches for about 4 weeks, and then had that rehab program right, as I said, when the boys are off playing for the Wallabies. And the end of the year was the World Cup, and that was going to be my one and only. I was the ripe old age of 30 or something like that, so I wasn't going to play another one. And it was obviously a little bit of a crisis, thinking, holy shit, I thought I was going to go to the World Cup, and now it's looking further and further away. But for me, I think getting through that was... rightly or wrongly, was okay, what can I control? And for me, a lot about that, just getting back from injuries, is what can I do tomorrow that's going to improve my situation? And that's really all I focused on. At the end of the day, I kept on looking up to make sure I didn't lose at the end goal, which was to try and put myself in the best position to get picked in the squad. And, history proved that went well. But going right back to what can I do tomorrow? Okay, what can I do the next day and the next day and the next day? And, so I was lucky enough, whatever you want to call it, to get back playing, then back in the Australian A, and from Australian A got picked for the last couple of test matches, then went away to the World Cup. So it was good, as I said. But you're right, it is very difficult because, everyone maps out where they think life, and this is life in general, is going to take them. And when something happens, particularly your sporting life, and you've suddenly got an injury or you're not picked or something devastating happens which takes you off that path that you've already naturally put out in front of you, you've got to recalibrate. And that's the biggest thing. You can either go, woe is me, and it's all shit and blah, 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 but you're wasting time. Yeah. So you quickly got to recalibrate and said, how can I get back on? It's not going to be linear. How can I get back to where I had, last week I was planning on lifting the World Cup in November. Well, that's not happening now because I'm on crutches. Okay, how can I get back on that? But by charting another course. So you've got to be resilient. You've got to be, pretty good at replanning, and then also I think being realistic about what is the next goal. As I said, all you can control is what you can. It sounds stupid, but it's true. And then for me, that was just on a day-by-day basis of not losing that sight and that goal, but then putting into action what was put in front of me.
The big thing there for me is you had such a short time frame, right? So you didn't really allow yourself the opportunity to feel really low about it. You didn't trick your mind, or did you trick your mind into thinking, this is it for me, like, and sort of have that moment of unease and unmotivated? Or were you straight away like, I can make this happen?
I wish I could say I probably had a night where I had too many beers. I reckon. Felt sorry for myself.
That wouldn't have helped the story.
Exactly. But look, I think at the end of the day too, I just thought, you know what? And again, that's again in my makeup. I thought, well, what can I do? You know, I can never whinge about it, or I can just bloody get on with it. So. Yeah. And then I guess I sort of got back to that quite quickly and again, because if you are doing that, and particularly if you're making progress too with the injury, that's the other thing, like was actually getting there, then those little steps I think reinforce, okay, I am on the right track here and keep doing it. And again, I think it was just that understanding, going back to say, control the controllables. I could control my rehab. I couldn't control how they were playing, how the guy who was playing in my position was playing, et cetera, et cetera. But I could control the rehab. I could control getting back into the sport club and then from there. So that was the really big thing, and grab that by two hands and do that to the very, very best of my ability from the rehab, because that's all I could do.
And then what happened?
Interestingly, yeah. So I ended up going to play for Australia A. So look, Australia didn't do so good while I wasn't there, thank God, which is terrible, death riding. You should never death ride, you're up the guy taking your jersey. So I ended up getting back in the side with a couple of games to go. We played one in South Africa, which we lost, but then came back to when we played, it was the last game, it was the second Bledisloe Cup game here in Sydney. And we were playing the All Blacks, obviously. And we ended up putting like almost a record score on them. And then that was the springboard. And then 3 weeks later, we were in Ireland in the pool games of the World Cup, and 7 weeks after that we lifted the World Cup, so it was pretty cool. So again, and those times that just make it like 10 times more beautiful, because you're wandering around the park at Millennium Stadium with all your mates holding the World Cup, 6 months prior to that I was on crutches, so it was pretty cool.
That's like such a great story, because it's gone from a matter of something maybe unachievable now to, come on, let's be motivated, let's get here, and then you've now won a World Cup, which was your ultimate goal in the beginning. It wasn't always easy though. There was, I think you told me about, a couple of other injuries you had where you missed out on playing in an arena that you were really passionate about.
Yeah, that's right. I dislocated my knee in Melbourne in '98 and missed the French tour, and also then broke and dislocated my thumb in '96, which I missed on playing on Cardiff Arms Park. Like the original Cardiff Arms Park, which, as a kid I used to watch games on that all the time. And so there's those little things again, but same sort of thing with process. And I think you learn that to your point, as you just learn that resilience. Like, okay, this is the situation. Again, going back to what I was saying before, I'm off piste now, I'm off course, but how can I get back on there? Okay, then you just, you realign yourself, you realign your goals and realign your strategy to ultimately get back where you need to go.
I'm sure, Dee, you've come across a few examples like this. You've had athletes, major injury, goal may seem unachievable. There's this switch in the mind, I would call it, and they're so motivated and they just want to achieve that goal. And they might not always get there, but that sort of process is so motivating and amazing for an athlete. Like, have you come across a lot of stories like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think of gold medal taekwondo Lauren Burns in Sydney Olympics, just springs to mind straight away. Day before she's due to compete, in practice just smashes her nose all over her face, just makes contact of a kick, and pretty much couldn't breathe, it was a really bad break, and goes ahead and wins a gold medal the next day. And I think the thing is that you have to, and Lauren has said, I've worked really closely with Lauren for a long time, but she would agree with this statement that sport just lifts you up in the stars and lets you float around and enjoy the glory of it, and then it pole drives you into the ground. But that's what we love about it. It's the uncertainty and the unknown often that fosters that real passion to keep going. But in terms of managing these sorts of things, I think some of the issues that you've just talked about is you've got to have information. When you get injured, first thing after you get over the oh woe is me and my whole life's just fallen apart is what information do I need to get myself back on track?
Yeah, so true.
And I keep going back to that earlier point that having good people around you. You can't have witch doctors and you can't have people say, I'll get you back on tomorrow. Yeah. You've got to get proper factual information. Once you've got that, understanding that being resilient is not a single event in your life. It's how you learn to cope with failures. And in sport, you're going to have 10 times more failures than you're going to have successes. And once you learn to set goals around your fears of that failure, then you can take control of it. And a lot of athletes will set goals that they'd like to achieve, but often don't set fear goals.
Yeah.
And to me, working with athletes, that's been one of the real beneficial things of, let's talk about what your fear goals are. Let's then look at, well, what's the real consequences of that, and how will you manage it? And so you're taking control of it and you're empowering yourself, but immediately you let go of allowing yourself to have some emotion and understanding that there is a grief process attached to this. You're going to absolutely be in shock. You're going to start blaming, I should have done, you should have told me to do this and you didn't. And then you're going to start to get really angry and then you're going to start to get sad, and then you're going to get a little bit of depression, and then you'll lift yourself up. Now, for some athletes, that can take 5 seconds. For other athletes, they spend their whole life going through that grief process. So it really is get the information, know what you have to do, allow yourself to be sad for a moment, and then say, well, I've got a choice here. I either wallow in it, as you said, or I want this more than I don't want it. And then the rest is history. You kick in.
Is that something you can learn, or
Yes.
is it just people, it's got to be innate in them to be able to have that resilience and have that understanding and say, okay, look, that's all well and good. I've gone through my grief process in 5 hours, but bang, I'm on this. I mean, as I said, is that something you can learn, or is it?
Well, you're born with a set of genes that either, if you think of a seesaw, where in the equilibrium you'll either be born with a bit more of a negative view of the world or a bit more of a positive view of the world, but then you're shaped by your experiences. And even at quite a late age, I think there's probably 3 or 4 things that anyone can do to improve their resilience. And the first one's going to sound a bit bizarre, and that is you've got to have a generosity of spirit. And by that I mean you have to know that it's not about you. And what happens is if you self-consume on everything that you face within your life, you get nowhere. So this generosity of spirit is every morning, think about 5 things you're grateful for. Just 5 things. Even if you're in the worst case scenario of your life, there'll be something that you can be grateful for. And the second thing is, and I've said it 3 times now, you've got to have good people around you that tell you the truth and stay close to you and know who you are. And then you've got to think about, fear is part of life. And so the more you put yourself into fear and the more you face that fear, the better you'll learn resilience as your life, goes on. And the last thing to me, it's about, who am I as a person? Having those real serious, honest conversations with yourself occasionally and thinking, if I'm a negative bugger and just see the worst case scenario in everything, what have I got to do to shift that? And your mental toughness is a muscle. And like any muscle that you have to work on and strengthen in your life, you have to work on it. And resilience is not a one-off thing. You can work on it. So if you think of it as a muscle and you define it in your own way you live your life as a muscle, then think about what you've got to do to strengthen that muscle.
There's a great All Black saying when they're training and when they're playing that you've got to put your head in a hard place in order to improve it. And I love it because for me, I think that the best rugby sides ever, and there is a reason for that. And to your point, you're not going to learn it from one day to the next. You're going to build it, molecule by molecule by molecule. Hard training session, and all those sorts of things are going to build resilience and understanding, isn't it?
Definitely.
So true.
And knowing how you deal with failure is really important. And being honest with yourself and lock yourself in a room. I've worked with athletes that have gone into a fetal position after they won a gold medal. And it's exactly the same feeling as failing for some people.
That's extraordinary.
It is, because they have invested absolutely everything in that dream, and that dream's been achieved, and it's like sitting on the edge of a cliff. Now what? It's exactly the same as somebody that fails.
That made me feel inside like I could just imagine like when you really want something and you want to get there and then you finally get it, like it's like it just made my insides feel.
But isn't that funny? Does that come down to the sort of person? Because someone else would, it's glass half empty, glass full, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, because the complete polar opposite would be, my God, I've just achieved what I've been setting out for the last 20, 30 years, whatever. I'm going to bask in the glory as opposed to curl up on the ground. Isn't it amazing?
But you're not sitting on the edge of a cliff. You measure your self-worth more than just on your rugby union.
Well, that goes back to your early point, which I completely agree with. You've got to be multifaceted. And if you define yourself by the sport, and I've seen it 100 times, and as soon as you step out of that, we call it limelight anemia. As soon as you're out of it, you lose your whole identity, which would be a terrible thing in life. But people have that with jobs. People have that with relationships, with partners, all those sorts of things. And that, again, coming down to the sort of person you're dealing with, do they project themselves onto what are they doing, and is that the most important thing? And that's me. And then the problem is that's out of your control. People can break up with you. People can sack you. You can get injured at your sport. So that, to your point then before, that's really when you've got to go, oh shit, okay, I better have something outside of this, because if I lose this, I'm going to lose the definition of who I am as a person, which is not healthy.
Well, even if you think of, back to that earlier point about success being as painful sometimes as failure, and you might go into coaching, it's like hanging on.
Exactly.
I see players who think that's just the answer, and it's not. You've got to remove yourself from it for a while and recreate yourself, work out what you want to do, and then you can go back into it. But if you stay in it, you're only just delaying the inevitable.
Well, the thing is, and we've all seen it 100 times, they don't know what else to do. And there's going back to the person who's defined by that, well, shit, I better be a coach. If I can't be a coach, I'll be a consultant. If I can't do that, I'll maybe go into the media. I'll just do something around that central core is all I know. But exactly, and this is maybe where it is stepping back, knowing that retirement is going to be somewhere within your control, or whether it's a month away or 3 years away, you know what I mean? It's not going to be 15 years away. So I think that's really important, is to start to take an alternative narrative as soon as possible, and to your point earlier, start exploring what are the other options. And first of all, what do I want to do? And that's about learning about yourself. And that was a nice thing when I was lucky enough to retire on my terms at 32. I have a pretty good idea, what I was good at and what I was bad at. So what I was bad at, I'm not going to pursue that. It's just wasting time. I definitely wanted to step right away, like at a tangent to sport. Said about 12 months before my contract was up, started doing work experience and doing what I was saying, just met up with a bunch of people who, that sounds a cool job, I'm going to be shit at that, can't do that, that sounds good. And then just going down these sort of holes and starting to put together a bit of a strategy around what I wanted to do, but also what was good for me. That was the other thing too. Like, as I said, I didn't want to go back and study to be a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. I wanted to pick something that I liked. But again, it's just getting onto that early, and then you're doing these little bits. But as I said before, it was really nice to step out of that, come back, drop the footy bags after being away on tour and putting a suit on and just go and hang around the office. Everyone thought, what's this bloke doing? Come and collect the rent or something. It was good, and I loved it. I loved the fact it got me out of the sport and got me out of that, positively oppressive situation. It was awesome.
Well, if you think of the sense of belonging you get from being involved, particularly in team sports, for some people that's their life, that connection with each other. And it's so hard when you're not part of that anymore and you're sitting on the outside of it. Sometimes your best friends are no longer, the relationship shifts because your whole friendship evolved around your sport. And so you talk about, you had
relatable stories.
Yeah.
And that's where injury treats you, that, isn't it? Because, you're sitting on the sideline. You know that. You're watching all your mates. They're in camp, they're touring, they're overseas, and you're going, hey, yo, hello.
Yeah, we just had a quick chat before we started about that. Is you see the videos and they're sending you Snapchats or whatever on socials, you're seeing them play and you're sitting there thinking, you feel, they're not doing it on purpose, but you feel so out of it. You feel so disengaged.
You almost don't want to know it.
Yeah.
That sometimes is a better way. Like, I don't give a shit where you are, how you're going, but damn it, because there's all my mates and they're doing what I love and where I should be. So it exacerbates the problem of that isolation of injury. And again, going to the point, that can either go one way, that can go, right, bloody hell, it's going to spur me on tomorrow. I'm going to do my rehab 100%.
Yeah.
I love that bit about what you're saying about education. I mean, knowledge is bloody power. Like, if you're sitting there in a vacuum and thinking, well, bugger it, I've just bloody broken my leg or whatever I've done, what can I do? And then therefore that good knowledge comes back into it. I mean, it's the same with career options. If I'm sitting here at the end of the day, I have no idea what I want to do. I know what I can't do, right? That's behind me, but I'm looking out over here and I've got no idea where to enter this forest, which is sporting career. And again, it's an education thing. It's a knowledge thing, schooling yourself up. And what I was saying before, it might look at 6 or 7 different job types. Could be really random and stuff, but I like doing all that. And if you like, you're never going to work a day in your life. But then, then you start to shut some doors and you're refining and narrowing and distilling it down to where, there's 2 viable options. I'm going to run real hard at those guys. And then, again, you'll end up picking one from there. But it's all knowledge, because knowledge gives you power and think, I got this now, I understand what I'm dealing with. Otherwise, you just, when you dive under a wave, you've no idea where you are, and you're just being thrown around by forces outside your own control.
Yeah, and disempowering yourself. But if you think of, say, a young person naturally going through that self-exploration and trying different jobs and working out, as you said, which doors to shut, if you haven't gone through that at a young age, and the first time you have to deal with it is when you're in your early 30s, the situation is you've got to take someone almost back before they can go forward, because they skip over a lot of those life skills because they've shut that part of their life down and didn't even realise they did when they were often 16, 15, 17 years of age.
All right. Dee, I wanted to finish up and get some pointers from you on, tactics and stuff that you would use among athletes. For me, myself, currently going through like a pretty tough injury times 2. And I know there's a lot of athletes going through this. The percentage of this injury is increasing, and it's an athlete's biggest fear is to do their ACL, I feel. It's such a huge injury among sport at the moment, especially in females. So quick backstory. Olympic dream, 2020, got put back in softball. Softball's my sport. I was so excited. You're so passionate about the sport. You just want to achieve everything and do everything to get there. Quit my job, took a contract overseas to play in the Netherlands. Best 8 months of my life. Absolutely loved the experience. Would never take it back. Met some great people. Got to play ball against a different bunch of people, different athletes. Towards the back end of the season, injured my knee pretty bad. Had some pretty bad medical advice over there. It's not your ACL. Have 10 weeks off. You'll be right. Played another 6 games. Played phenomenally. Probably the best I'd played, actually. Was feeling really fit, confident for nationals at the end of that year. Got back. Redislocated it on my last training session whilst I was there. And I'm like, there's something else going on here. There's something wrong with my knee. Came home. I remember my physio picking up my scan, and at this point I had no idea, right? So I'm still thinking, it's okay, I've just got a bad knee. My physio picks up my scan and he goes, it's a heartbreaker. And as soon as he said that, I knew, and it just my heart shattered, because I'd sacrificed so much, and my mind did go to that bad place. I've just lost everything that, I worked for, and it was the fittest I'd been. I was so excited. I was so ready. I knew I was going to make that squad. I knew within myself, and it was really tough for me. But I quickly switched it around, and I was like, you know what? I'm fit. I played really well over there. I know I can do it. Spent the next 9 months rehabbing, got back in really good time, started playing again, 3 months in, make the New South Wales Opens team again, ready to play nationals, and, a bad turn, and I've now done my opposite knee. So I'm about 4 months post-op there. I know it's very common with this injury that if you do one, you do the other, sort of within that 7-year mark. I just never expected it to happen so quickly. So as an athlete, wanting to achieve a goal, softball's just, really taken off, Dee, as you would know. It was really tough watching nationals this year, seeing the SummerSlam come out, which for those of you who don't know is a new series that, softball's just taken on. And
like a big bash of softball.
Yeah, and it was awesome. To watch was amazing, but also really tough. That comes down to your point, Rich. It's just you want to watch, but you're also, it's so hard, to sit there and be a part of that. So I guess what I want to say is athletes that are in my mind frame right now, I still have big goals. I'm still so passionate, and I'm doing everything I can to get back. What are your strategies when an athlete comes to you with these sort of scenarios?
Well, I think the first thing is to normalise the experience. What you have just described is a normal reaction that thousands and thousands and thousands of athletes around the world go through. That's the first thing. It's part of playing sport, is you are going to get injured. I don't know, in fact, I would be struggling to find one athlete that has achieved success internationally who hasn't been injured at some time. The first point I always say to them is this is the best gift you're ever going to be given, because it really does determine for you whether you want this and how bad. And people will look at you really strangely when you say that. You say, well, you've obviously never been injured if you're going to say that to me. But it has, because you need to be reminded of just how important your passion is. And the only way you can get reminded every now and again is for it to be taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Normalise it, understand that this is probably defining you or will define you as a better player. The next thing is to look at the plan. What is your plan, and how realistic is the return date? Who have you got in your team? How good are they? Have you had other referrals, other options? And then stay very, very close to making sure that generosity of spirit stays with you. So you don't become so self-consumed that you become, you start to go into a cave and never come out. It's all about you, because the best way you can help yourself is to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about it, just like you have just then. Talk about it to people that know you, so they know what that your mood swings and the way you're going to react to things sometimes and is not personal. And then stay true to that dream. Mm-hmm. But just keep adjusting the goal if you have to, because there's not going to be one Olympic Games, Juz. There's going to be endless Olympic Games. You're still young. You've still got an opportunity in the game that you love, because it's being popped out of one Olympics and then coming back in 2028. You'll make it. There's no doubt in my mind that you'll make it. But the issue is, how much do you want it? How much do you normalise it? Who have you got on your team? Mm-hmm. And the rest is history. And even if you don't make it, you're going to be a better person by going through this experience.
Yeah. Anything on that, Rich? Would you agree?
Well, 100%. I think all that is just such good advice. And I think, as I said, at the end of the day, it's happened. As I said before, you've been yanked off what you subconsciously or consciously had as a path forward, and you're suddenly at 180 degrees or whatever, and you found yourself in a different forest. You then got to quickly reassess, how do I get back to where I want to go? And that's it. And that's, again, with good people. And that is a mixture of yourself basically owning it, understanding what you're dealing with, and again, so that knowledge base, being surrounded by good people. And I think knowledge is a really, really good thing that came out of what Dee was saying before. Yep. Knowing, okay, I'm in this type of environment, so where I am at the moment, and this is what I've got to do to get out of it, and then controlling the controllables. What can I do next? Is it just a good night's sleep? That's one thing I can, okay, bang, do that. Next thing, eat probably tomorrow morning, then do my rehab. That's what I mean. It's little tiny baby steps, and then suddenly there's 3 months behind you. So I think that's really, really good advice. But I think the biggest thing we're talking about now is starting to, as I said, like control, your own destiny. So even sitting back, I mean, even if someone's listening to this and they're 100% peak performance, they're about to go out in a world championship next week, just think what if, and theoretically you shouldn't be thinking about anything else other than winning that. But this is just a nice time over a cup of coffee. Somebody start to have a bit of a think about it and to start to separate and give yourself these different parts and start to open up different doors to who you are as a person. It's going to make you a better person anyway when you put yourself back into what you're doing tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and it's great feedback to take on. So any sort of athlete that's listening might be in a situation very similar. It could be any injury, but you're I find myself like this. Some days I'm super motivated, and then you just have like a bit of a bad patch, and you're going to get that. And one example I always use for myself is, when you're in school, if you ever did athletics and you're running a race, right? And you might be in the lead or you might be coming second at any point in the race. And, you get close to that person, and when they meet side by side, one of them's going to have that switch. There's one switch that happens, and when that happens, one of them's going to take the lead, and it's the person who goes, oh, I'm too exhausted, and lets them take the lead. That's that switch in your mind, and that's how strong it is. And it's always a way. It's always the person in the lead either goes, I'm still going to win and I'm not going to let you pass me, or the second person goes, I want this so bad, and they overtake, and then this person shuts off. So it's a really powerful thing I tell myself is, in that race, who do I want to be? Do I want to be the person who's so exhausted but I just make it, or do I want to be the person who switches off and lets that person go in front? So that's an example I love and I always use. So I think for athletes in this situation, reach out, find a mentor, surround yourself with good people. Any other sort of advice to finish up, guys, for what people would...
Read other people's stories. I often say to athletes, get some biographies, not just about, athletes that have had hard times, but normal everyday Joe Blows that have survived extraordinary circumstances. Read their stories because you know, you often get so self-centered when you're injured and think you're the only person in the world that ever has been through this, and no one's ever going to understand. And so you've got to get out of yourself and read some good books.
Yeah.
Read good biographies, and you'll find a bit of yourself in there, and you'll learn that you know, life goes on and things.
You're not alone. There's
exactly. You're
similar.
normalising it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, everyone uses sport as a proxy for life, you know, like got my nose broken, went on to win a gold medal the next day. Oh, shit, okay, I hate my boss. How can I turn that? You know, but I think it's a good point when you're a sports person, use it around the other way, that there's a huge world out there, and you don't do sport for the rest of your life. The one thing I would probably say to anyone listening is just start questioning. What am I doing? How am I going? Just start questioning, and that'll start to throw out, you know, as I said, and avenues you can start going down. But just question in a really good positive way about where I am, what I want to do, what I want to do post-life, how's everything going at the moment. Once you start getting those questions going in your head, mate, it'll be a good process.
Yeah, awesome. I really enjoyed today, guys. From a mentor point of view, Richard, you're happy. Athletes going through transition, you had a really good experience and you were very prepared for yourself. So if anyone has questions, you're happy for them to reach out to you.
100%, absolutely.
Yeah, and Dee, same with you. You've worked with a lot of athletes. I will attach your website to our page and everything, and happy for people to reach out.
Absolutely.
Great. Anything to finish up, guys? Last bit of advice?
Have fun.
Have fun.
Have a crack. There you go.
All right. Thanks, guys.